Hello, this is Peter Joseph, and you're listening to V Radio.
Good evening, and welcome to this edition of V Radio. I know it's been a little while since I've been on, guys, but I finally got a guest that I felt absolutely definitely needed to be on the air. If this is your first time checking out V Radio, please check out my website, v-radio.org. There you can listen to more archives of shows like this one, interviews with documentary filmmakers, politicians, a few good ones, activists, scientists, and all kinds of other great content, including roundtable discussions about different current events that affect the activist world. You can also check out my must-see TV list, which is a list of free documentaries that you can watch on the Internet. I tend to have a lot of documentary filmmakers on, and I review documentary films, which is one of the reasons why I brought on our guest today. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in today. And if you like what you hear, I do accept donations, although I don't have any donation goals anymore. If you like what you hear and you'd like to hear more, don't hesitate. You can do that at my website as well. So now I'm going to welcome my guest to the show. How would you prefer to be called? By your last name or your first name? Mr. Booth sounds a little too formal.
Yeah, you don't have to call me Mr. Booth. Just call me Kevin.
All right, Kevin. It's actually really great to finally have you on, Kevin. I've wanted to have you on V Radio since I watched your first documentary years and years ago. It actually had a big impact on me, like during my libertarian phase. I was kind of back and forth on the issue of the war on drugs. To give you a little background on myself and how it affected me, the very early part of my life, I lived on a farm. Life was very simple, a dairy farm where your nearest neighbor is really far away and all that. And then eventually my parents got divorced, and the economic situation was really terrible. Bankruptcy was involved and all that, and I ended up in the ghetto. And some of the more formative years of my life were spent being kind of a child from the outside of the ghetto who was kind of forced to live there. As you can imagine, that wasn't easy. Couple that with the fact that, I got to see the drug war up close and personal, in the form of one of my neighbor's houses going from just being a place where people live to slowly turning into a crack house while we were living there, just to be living right next door to them. And I still remember to this day, one of the culture shocks for me was like I was dating this girl who came from a much nicer neighborhood, and she was visiting one night, and they started raiding the house next door, and she was like glued to the window because she had never seen anything like that before, and they threw the flashbang in, and you could see the light, flicker throughout the house. And, to me, I had been so accustomed to it since I had seen that house get raided so many times at that point, that I just kind of casually went back to playing video games like it was no big deal. Looking back on that in hindsight, though, obviously I realized that I was desensitized to something that was pretty terrible. But one of the things I have to say, because I've heard both sides of the argument about the decriminalization or legalization of drugs argument, that was different about your documentary was that it wasn't one-sided. You still showed that, by no means are we suggesting that there are not drugs out there that are in fact quite bad. One of the scenes in particular, actually, that really struck me was the scene with that fellow who was naked at a bar, high on PCP or whatever, just randomly blabbing, and so you put the good with the bad. You also
no, but for sure. I mean, and I got that scene from the first American drug war film, and you say years and years ago. You're making me feel old. Well, it was 2008. I guess it's 5 years ago. Dying. It's funny that a lot of people in the drug legalization movement did have trouble with me putting that scene in there. Don't show that guy on PCP. That gives the wrong thing. That makes drug. But it's just like. My feeling is, how are you ever going to right this wrong if you're not honest? And basically, everybody that's in this movement is accusing the federal government or everybody that's creating this drug war of being dishonest. And at the same time, you're wanting to argue with them and fight them by being dishonest. So that's not going to work. In order for us to shed light on this, we have to be 100% honest and trying to act. There are people in this movement that will sit there and very legitimate conservative people and look me right in the face and say, well, I think all drugs should be decriminalized and all drugs should be legal. And I guess on a certain level, I agree with that. I don't think you should go to prison for what you put in your body, but I think that, you know, I don't want to live in a world where people can sell PCP to school kids. I don't want to live in a world where people can just go buy crystal meth down the street, or my next door neighbor can sell crystal meth. I have no interest in that.
Right, but it's kind of like the decriminalization attitude points out, is that people who, you know, do that kind of stuff. It was like when you go to when you went to Amsterdam or Holland, you know, like you said, it took you some effort to be able to find a single enthusiastic crack smoker. It's just after people see that stuff, that's the thing. You know, it's like, it's about educating people. You know, I see that scene with that guy with PCP. I'm never touching that stuff. You know, ever. You know.
Yeah, definitely. And that is a funny story. I don't know how funny it is. The story that goes along with that clip, and that is when I did the LAPD ride along, I had to sign a 10-page contract through the Los Angeles Police Department stating that they would have final right of control over the edit, yada yada, of the film. So when they saw that scene of, you know, basically it's a naked black guy being tasered, and he's got taser darts all in his, you know, naked body, and he's ranting and raving all crazy, the police's response was, well, you can't put that in your movie because that gives away some of our top secret, you know, techniques.
Right. Top secret.
Yeah, and I actually had to get a lawyer and started arguing with them back and forth, and then they finally came back around to, and this actually, it was in Chinatown here in Los Angeles, and the guy had run into a restaurant, a really big old Chinese restaurant, smack dab in the middle of Chinatown, where this whole incident took place. And so the police ended up saying, well, if you can get the owner of the restaurant to sign something stating that it's okay with him, then we'll allow it. And it was so ridiculous. I ended up going down to this restaurant trying to get them to sign something, and it turned out to be the most ridiculous thing. That the police were basically just playing a game with me, you know, and they knew exactly what they were doing. And they have all these people, and the police have them, the prisons have them, all these so-called, you know, services or social services that are supposed to be on our side. They all have these so-called PR people. And really, these PR people's jobs are nothing more than to make sure that the press does not get to do what they want. And in that, only the mainstream press will tell the exact story that they want you to tell. And that's exactly what the people from the LAPD were doing, was trying to control exactly what I did. And the ironic part was I was not trying to make the officers look bad. That was not my intent at all. In fact, I really liked the guy that I was with. I ended up being friends with the officer that I spent the day filming with, and he was actually proud of the film when he saw it. And it was never my intention to make police officers look bad.
I didn't even really think that they had. I mean, I've seen people on PCP before. Honestly, I know that, you know, particularly in the movements that you and I run in, people are very hard on cops, but the reality is a guy on PCP can frickin' kill you. You know.
No, and that's just it. And, you know, just yesterday here in Los Angeles, we had another one of these police things where the police shot the dog in Hawthorne. I'm sure you've seen that, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a tricky deal with the police. I mean, because you can't. It's a sad situation, and the drug war has really added to that. You know, back when I was growing up, people, you know, when I was a little kid back in the early '60s. People thought of the police as their friendly neighbor. People trusted the police. They looked for, you know, they were glad the cop was driving down their street. And now we live in a world where even rich white people who pay a lot of taxes are afraid of the police. You know, what is the deal with that? You know, people that make a lot of money, pay a lot of taxes, are afraid to just basically interact with the cops because they don't know what they're going to do. And it's and I think the drug war has had a huge impact on many levels, all the way from the idea that police might be taking antidepressants to the gun situation, to the level of violence and craziness, to the gangs, to having to fill private prisons, all these different aspects that the drug war works on. But the drug war has really had a huge effect on making the police no longer these people you trust.
Right, for sure. And it's interesting that, if you know how to talk to them, which is pretty much actually just talking to them like normal people, they usually don't act like, the stereotype that you normally get either. And I've actually been round and around, particularly when I was hanging out with the Occupy group, because they're always really nervous when the cops show up. And I've never had a single problem with a police officer as an activist ever. And it's usually because I just approach them like somebody who isn't doing anything wrong, because I'm not. And people tend to be so nervous around cops that even if they're not doing anything wrong, they start acting nervous, which of course makes it look like they're doing something wrong. And then, I guess part of it is that I had kind of a unique experience working at a 24-hour 7-Eleven for many years when I was younger. And the cops always come and hang out and talk to you, and you get to know them, and you get to find out about their world and where they live. And, for them, they're trying to make sure you're not going to shoot them. You don't generally go with your day-to-day life thinking about whether or not people are going to shoot you. And if you are concerned about that because you're a police officer or a soldier, it's definitely going to change the way you interact with people. But I don't want to get too far on that tangent. One of the things actually I normally do at the beginning of every one of these shows, and it occurred to me that because I knew a little bit about your background already, I didn't feel inclined to ask this question, but being as how obviously some people listening to this show have never heard of you before, why don't you take a moment to there's usually the question I ask is, what was the precipice moment for you? What was the moment that made you decide to go from just being a regular guy who was part of the world to being an activist trying to make it better? Was it one moment? Was it a few moments?
Well, it was a few moments. I grew up with a comedian named Bill Hicks, who passed away in '95 from cancer. So if any of your listeners know who Bill Hicks was, he ended up being a very politically engaged comedian. We grew up together, went to high school, had a rock band together, several rock bands together, and then he went off to be a comic. I went off to be a musician. Went through different phases. My band broke up. His comedy got more political, and then we joined forces later on, and I started producing all of his records, and I produced his first comedy concert stand-up. And then Bill started getting into more conspiratorial stuff. He was like one of the very first people I know to actually start using the word New World Order. Mm-hmm. We're talking late 80s here. This is way, way pre-Alex Jones or any of this. And, and not long after that, the Waco siege happened. And so I guess it was the whole Waco incident with the Branch Davidians that was a huge turning point, and we were there filming during the 7th day of the siege, and then seeing that the government lit the church on fire and burned all those people. And then after Bill passed away from cancer, I started hanging out a little bit more with Alex Jones and started driving up there and filming it. And I got to actually know a lot of the Branch Davidians and realized, because the government and everybody in the media was basically saying these people were trying to commit suicide. And I got to know a lot of the Branch Davidians and realized that was just all completely fabricated. And it was just extremely in your face, first person. It's one thing when you're watching it on TV, seeing it on the news, but it was another thing, when you're actually hanging out with these people who had just had their families and friends all burned to death. And they're sitting there saying, no, we never wanted to die. We're just these people just trying to, maybe the guy leading us was kind of had some problems and he was a little bit of a nut. Whatever. I don't really know what all David Koresh's deal was, but it certainly didn't deserve for a bunch of women and children and babies to be burned to death. I know that.
Right.
And so that was really a huge turning point for me.
Yeah, that's actually when I watched the movie Waco: The Rules of Engagement, I got finished watching it. I was so angry, I literally went to the air immediately and started ranting about what I had just seen in that film. And I mean, actually, one of these days I'd love to get whoever put that film together on here too to talk about it, but it's definitely an interesting turning point. Now, how does this link up to basically your interest in drug decriminalization and ending prohibition?
Well, I mean, many years later, I just got involved with, basically, this is back in Austin, Texas now, in the 90s, and we had this thing there called Austin Public Access TV. This is before the internet, keep in mind, right? I know it's hard to imagine, but this is before we had this thing called the internet. But we had this thing that was a public access TV station, which back for us, this was like our internet, because we could go down there and create TV shows, and they would be broadcast over cable TV into like almost 500,000 homes around the surrounding area. And this, this was amazing because you could go down there and you could do things about your band, politics, religion, and you could curse, you could get away with a lot on this public access station. There really wasn't any censorship, and so it became this Austin public access became kind of a breeding ground for a lot of this conspiracy theorist types that kind of were generated and came from this whole movement. And that's really, how I came up through that. And, I work with Alex and some other people. I produce videos with a comedian named Joe Rogan who did Fear Factor, another comedian named Doug Stanhope. And I was working with other people, and I decided, and this was, and this wasn't long after my brother had passed away. My brother was schizophrenic, and he had a seizure. Then my mom died from liver failure. She was, she had to have a lot of insulin, diabetes, and she kept drinking. And then my dad died, and so I had all these deaths all in a row. And I attributed every single one of these deaths to the legal drugs of alcohol, tobacco, and pharmaceuticals. And at the same time, I had a friend that went to a prison camp, a guy named Mambo Johnny Trainer, who was a local drummer in Austin, who used to grow the only really good marijuana you could get in Austin back in the time. It was like the only guy that had like what we called the kind bud back then. This is pre-hydro, pre-dispensary, way back in the day, but it was like the good stuff. He gets arrested and he went to a prison camp. When he came back from a prison camp, he died. And so, those factors, and then not long after 9/11, when Bush came out with the if you buy drugs, you support terrorism thing, I was seething. I was having another, what am I going to do with my life? Am I going to just be a guy who tries to make money, or am I going to be a guy that tries to make a difference? Maybe I could try to do both. And I decided to do a film about the drug war.
It was definitely a good one, and as I had pointed out earlier, just the different ways that it went about things, and that kind of brings us back to where we were before I asked you to do that, but, the trip to Amsterdam, and, that actually led to me talking, because I talk to people from all over the world because of my involvement in the Zeitgeist movement and other activism on the Internet, and I've asked people who live there, what's it like, to live in this decriminalized situation, and it's certainly not the crazy anarchy that, for that sheriff guy you were talking to is trying to lead the world to thinking.
Right. And when you talk to people like Sheriff Joe Arpaio, he's the guy. He's still around. He's still huge and famous, Sheriff Joe Arpaio. And people, throughout the years are always like, oh, he's in big trouble now, and then nothing ever happens to him, right? The guy just completely controls. I'll be amazed the day that guy ever gets in any kind of trouble. He was like, I had him on camera basically saying, oh, when you go to Amsterdam, everybody's on drugs and you're stepping over bodies in the street because everyone is so high on drugs. And then when you talk to other people, they're making it sound like Amsterdam is just this mountain of orgy, like pot, just crack, heroin, just completely insane. And then of course you go there and it's just like dun dun dun, like happy little street music and people dancing around, and you have to search out these coffee houses. So even just to find marijuana, you have to go looking for it. And then talking about hard drugs, then you really got to go looking for it. And at the time I was looking more like a rocker, and I get the occasional guy coming up to me asking me if I wanted to buy ecstasy or coke or something like that, but you had to search it out. And so this fantasy that by decriminalizing drugs, Amsterdam turned into this hellhole was just ridiculous.
Right, and there wasn't any gunfights in the streets, and all the things that I can say, having grown up in the area where the drug war is kind of ground zero, Amsterdam doesn't look anything like Pontiac or Detroit, Michigan. It doesn't look anything like the places that I live, like, certain parts of Cleveland or, places in Ohio, that are also like projects and all that, and there's definitely a difference, and the expose that you did, for example, on the stuff that Ricky Ross did, and that life and how that developed, it was also something I think a lot of people are not really aware of when they think of the drug war, especially the average suburban voter has no frickin' idea what that's like. They have no clue what it's like to live in those situations. They might drive through Detroit to go to a concert or something, but they are really good at tuning out, things like the homeless people on the street or the prostitutes. It's like they don't exist, but you definitely gave a very clear picture of what it's like to live in those cities and what the drug situation does to those places. And that's why, especially in regards to that, that first film, I definitely tell people, search this film out, try to find it on places like Netflix and Amazon or whatever. Give this guy credit for the work you did, because especially like that guy who volunteered to be a homeless guy lying on the side of the street, filming people. I can tell you, having grown up in that neighborhood, I would never do that. You could never pay me to do that. Never.
That's my right. That's my boy. That's my homeboy. That's Mac Lindsay, who's actually a comedian. And anybody living in New York right now, Mac is out there working at being a comedian and doing all the clubs out there in New York right now. So if you're in New York and you're a comedy fan, go see Mac Lindsay. That was the guy from the movie that helped me film those scenes of crack dealers in L.A. And but I get. I mean, I live in Los Angeles, and in LA, you can live in one neighborhood and not ever see the ghetto by certain routes that you take on the freeway. So you have to go find the ghetto here in LA, or take that kind of a route. If you stay on the major interstates, you'll never really see the ghetto. And talking about Freeway Ricky Ross, we were talking before the interview, and you're asking me about that. But Ricky got out of prison. For those of you who don't know, Ricky was held by many as the guy that started the crack epidemic, and it turned out that he was getting his cocaine, not crack, but he was getting his cocaine from a CIA connection. This was all tied into the Iran-Contra. And you could actually just Google the name Freeway Ricky Ross, and it's a pretty incredible story. And Freeway Rick and I have actually ended up becoming friends, and Rick's out of prison now, and he's actually doing a lot of really good things for the community.
Well, it was another thing, because, of course, like, having grown up next to drug dealers like that, when the story started, I found myself, initially kind of disliking the character that he is, and then there was that scene that you brought up where he went to deliver drugs at this house, and then he saw the look on the kid's face like, thanks for taking the money that was going to pay for our frickin', dinner tonight, jerk, like he understood in that moment that he was essentially inflicting the poverty that he was trying to escape from on other people. And that he had remorse in that moment, and actually started to warm me back up to remembering, okay, well, he got into this, because of the situation he was in, the environment that he was in. Like one of my mentors in the streets, one of the first kids to take me in, ended up being a drug runner. Like, he just delivered, and I was like, why are you doing this? He's like, I know you're against this stuff. He's like, well, I can't pay for college any other way. There was literally no way. It's
a fine line, and people that, and I'm not going to sit here and go like, oh, I know all about the ghetto, or not. I'm a guy from Texas. I'm a white guy. I don't know what it's like to live in the ghetto. Obviously, you know a lot more than I do what it's like to live in the ghetto. But until people, have to live through those kind of situations, what you have to do to survive, and people are going to try to survive, and if you don't have food, I mean, basically the point I think Ricky's making is that when you don't have food in your stomach, you're going to do anything. And
right.
And you can't really blame people. And the drug war has created a situation of that. The point is that we shouldn't have this in that country. We don't need to have all these like people starving to death, and they got to resort to selling drugs in order to feed themselves. It's because of the drug war that we have that situation.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, then that's what I was saying. I kind of came full circle. So, I mean, you said he does a lot for his community now. How does he look back on that part of his life in retrospect? I mean, did he continue down that path of remorse and essentially understanding what he was doing?
I don't know if it's so much remorse as it is, he's not a kind of guy that sits around feeling sorry for what he did. He's pretty much live in the present tense now. I mean, he realizes, that he did create a lot of destruction, but I think he's also karmically making it up by trying to help a lot of people. And as the story goes, back in those days, he used to kind of almost be the Santa Claus of the ghetto. I mean, he used to share his wealth with a lot of people, and so
Right.
you know, he was earning a lot of money from people's addictions to crack, I guess you could say. But he was also, you know, he actually was building a youth center. I mean, how many crack dealers do you know that like build a youth center, you know,
Sure.
with the money from the crack? So it's a tricky, you know, it's a tricky deal. It's a tricky deal. He used what he had to make it happen. And I get a lot of flack from people going, you know, like accusing me of glorifying some crack dealer and jumping on like, oh, this is like the whole, you know, hip hop, you know, it's cool to be a gangster bandwagon and all that. But, you know, I don't know. I've, you know, maybe when I was younger, you could accuse me of that. But now that I've gotten older and I come full circle on this thing, you just start to see all sides of people just trying to survive.
For sure. That kind of brings us back to what we were saying, is that most people don't understand what it's like to live in that situation. I mean, especially as we have economic difficulties in different places, like there are frequently times like, you know, where I've struggled to be employed because of where I live, and people who don't live in this area don't have any idea what it's like to literally go out and put applications everywhere you possibly can. You know, you've now written literally 60 to 70 applications out and put them out, and you get no calls. People have no idea what that's like, and to them, the world is still set up. Maybe it is where they're living. Maybe it is still easy to get a job. Maybe it is still easy to make a legitimate living where they live. So it's out of sight, out of mind. It's impossible for them to even equate it. And I think films like yours go a long way to be, you know, giving people an education, you know, directly as to what it's like to live in that situation. So now, I think we've talked a little bit, you know, about the first film, and obviously, you know, you made a new one, and there's screenings on that going now. And before we get into giving details about that, what made you decide you needed to make another film?
Well, you know, I actually made another one called How We'd Won the West. That was a more comical film that came right after American Drug War, and that was, you know, I guess what you would call straight to video kind of a deal. Although it is on video on demand now, and through all the same distributors. But you know, it's I guess because the drug war continues, and so many people said, well, after the first film, which is kind of the A to Z covering all the issues, what are you going to possibly do? And I didn't want to make a movie where it's, you know, like Star Wars Part 1, now here's Part 2, like where you got to watch the first one to get the second one. And, you know, I wanted to try to keep it real as possible. But at the same time, there's so many people out there doing films and documentaries about marijuana that the market on what you call pot docs has become so crazy saturated. But at the same time, it is the battle over the legalization of marijuana that is front and center, and so that is the real deal right now. That's basically on the news. It's everywhere. That's where the raids are taking place. Everything's going on. Living here in California, I'm in the middle of it all. So what to do? Like how to keep it in the drug war vein? When I started off, you know, we spent over a year making more of a informational based type documentary, filming doctors and scientists and experts and lawyers, and it was going to be this very informational driven talking head type of movie. And to tell you the truth, I got bored editing it and realized that I'm more of a touchy feely through the heart kind of a guy, and those are the kind of movies I like. I myself am more attracted to watching films that are more story driven and more emotionally driven, you know, keep you emotionally involved, make you either love the characters or hate the characters or root for the characters or hope for the characters' demise. And we ended up taking more of that turn and decided to make it more of a personal story. And a lot of it had to do with then what happened with my wife and I. My wife and I couldn't have children, and we became foster parents. Mm-hmm. And we went through the whole indoctrination of getting indoctrinated into the foster system. And this had nothing to do with the movie, by the way. This is something completely separated from the movie that started long before we started working on this second American Drug War film. But then later down the line, and you have to go through months and months of all this rigmarole before you even get your first foster kid. We get this one kid that come to our house, and it's right before Christmas. And she's an 11-year-old girl, seems completely normal, and yet we get handed all these prescription medications, almost like when someone, you know, brings like a like a wounded animal or something like that, going, give it these pills in the morning, give it these pills at night. You know what I mean? It's just,
right.
It's like this disconnect of like, here's this kid, now here's all this stuff you got to give it, and it was so weird. But at the same time, if we didn't give the child all these drugs, they would just take her away from us. So you're forced to play the game. If you don't play the game, well, then the kid will just be off somewhere else, and then you didn't help her at all or help the kid at all. So we're forced to play the game, and basically what we found out was that the group home that this child had just come from had 10 other kids, and they were all given Adderall at 6 in the morning, so they would.
You still there?
Oh, it just came by. Did you hear that? Okay,
yeah, you're fine. On. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So basically, at 6 in the morning, they would give all 10 of these kids Adderall at about 6 in the morning so that they would wake up and go to school. Adderall is basically speed. And then they'd give all 10 of these kids a powerful tranquilizer at about 7 o'clock at night so they'd all go to bed.
Wow.
And you find out that most kids in the foster system are drugged. And it's really a way of controlling them. And the ironic part is that a lot of these kids are removed from their birth parents because they're, drum roll, punchline, because the parents are using drugs.
Right,
but it's not the kind of drugs that can profit the government. So the parents that are caught using the kind of drugs that don't profit the pharmaceutical companies or the alcohol, or the government, then the kids are taken away and then be put on these other drugs, and they'll the kid is depressed because he was removed from his mother. Like, well, gosh, that's weird. Like, we better give him these pills, and so that suddenly became like a really important part. And through that, kind of a light went off in my head, and I realized that this new drug war movie should be about how the drug war affects children. And since we had already been doing all this research into people actually curing cancer, not just treating the side effects of cancer with cannabis, people actually curing cancer, killing cancer cells using these like powerful new forms of cannabis oil that are being created, we decided to gel these stories together, and then it also became a story about pediatric cancer and children in general, of children's struggle and plight because of the ridiculous drug prohibition laws and how it affects children of all types, including kids. We go to Juarez, Mexico, where little kids are being recruited to kill for about $40 a pop for the cartels. And another major part of the movie is about a little boy named Cash Hyde who has a brain tumor. And the parents, the little boy is basically in a coma for 40 days, not eating or using the bathroom for 40 days in a ICU unit in Salt Lake City. And the parents start sneaking in this cannabis oil that they discovered on the internet and injecting it into their son's feeding tube, unbeknownst to the hospital staff. And the little boy pops out of his coma and starts eating again. And then the brain tumor shrinks and goes away. And the hospital staff thinks that they just witnessed a miracle. And when the father of the boy, Mike Hyde, who's one of the main characters of the film, tells the hospital staff that it was cannabis that did this, that they want nothing to do with it, and that's kind of where the story starts on that level. And so, like the first movie, it's kind of, I guess, my editing style of interweaving stories together and interweaving issues and stories together to keep it all moving at a pretty high pace. And the second film is 90 minutes long, so I made it shorter than the first film. And I try to, there's a lot more that could have been put in this movie, but I try to make a movie that can really move fast enough to where it will keep people's attention that aren't even necessarily interested in the topic. I don't want to preach to the choir. There's a lot of documentaries out there, I feel, that are just kind of preaching to the choir. I'm trying to make a documentary that people who don't totally agree with me, they may sit through it and roll their eyes, but at least after they watch it, it's going to give them something to think about and maybe do a little research.
For sure, and you definitely succeeded with that, at least with the first one, for sure. And although I was already open-minded because that's the way I am, and the second one just kind of reinstated that. The whole argument about marijuana is so ridiculous to me. And while I don't use it myself because of some of the side effects would probably be pretty complicated to some problems I already have with short-term memory and things like that, people like my mother took it because it was actually funny. I remember my 18th birthday. She was so good at keeping it from me that she was using it. And it was my 18th birthday. After everybody had left, she pulls out the stuff and wants to smoke a joint with me. Yeah. And I didn't want to do it at the time, and I understand what she was going from. But she had glaucoma, she had cancer, she had lupus. I mean, she had so many things that were complicating her quality of life. And I did not look down on her for deciding to do it. And I certainly, especially since I remember the time period of her life that came shortly after when she got the cancer. That was when she had not been doing it anymore. Like, she wasn't doing it for a long time. And when they finally found the cancer, she had this like tumor like the size of her fist between her heart and her lungs. It was totally inoperable. And and watching that your second film and the story about this kid, it made me wonder. I'm like, geez, I wonder if my mom's pot use was keeping her tumor down all that time. Because they literally just kind of discovered it out of the blue. That it was there and it was huge. So it hadn't been going for a long time. And when it comes to the pharmaceutical companies, particularly when it comes to cancer, Peter Joseph's brother actually recently did a documentary about that topic. And
Brzezinski, actually that's the second. That's the second Brzezinski movie. They're both amazing.
Right, and I was so angry because especially since when my mom. Right before she died, she showed me this paper, and I, of course, couldn't make heads or tails of it, but she said she had overheard some of her doctors, and they were talking about this paper, and she kind of got her hands on it, and she looked at it and said, according to this, my white blood cell count is such that they should not be doing chemo on me, yet they're doing it anyway. So if something happens to me, please investigate this. And I didn't know where to take it from there, unfortunately. But when she finally passed away, and it looked very much like, essentially, what had happened with her was that they should not have been using chemo at all, and that eventually it caused her kidneys to fail, and so she died. So you sit there and you're looking at the screen as this information is coming to you about the different alternative methods that might have been used, and you're like, these bastards killed my mother. They killed my mother. It really starts to become more personal to you. And I guess that's another thing. It's kind of hard to equate to somebody, but
and it should be personal.
You had a family member obviously taken by cancer as well. You talked about that in the first film. Did he ever get to see any of your work, or did he pass away before you were done?
No, my dad passed away long before I was done. He died just in the very beginning stages of the first American drug war. He got to see, I had done a book about Bill Hicks, called Agent of Evolution, that came out on HarperCollins in the UK, and he got to see that, and he was proud of that, and I just got started on the American drug war film, and it made him real nervous. He was very worried about my safety and thought I was a little crazy. He was proud of me for doing it, but at the same time, he, one of his dying wishes was be careful,
right?
Because he thought I was playing with fire.
Right. Well, that's, and I guess that, was the common misconception at the time. I think actually my mother would have loved your film, when it comes to the whole issue, and that's actually something that I wanted to bring up, and I had this in my notes. When Gary Johnson pointed out that, and this is only somewhat related, but basically that the issue is the authorities involved with telling us what drugs are dangerous and what drugs are not. Essentially when they do something like label marijuana as being as dangerous as these other hard drugs that it's labeled next to, your child goes out into the world. And, the drug pusher, of course, has every interest in getting them into whatever will be best for them financially. But you give them marijuana, and then you obviously see, well, this isn't so bad. Why? I don't get it. What else are they lying to me about? Is essentially the message that the kids get, because the authorities are telling, oh, no, it's bad, it's terrible, it's just as bad as anything else. And then they smoke this stuff, and particularly the more despicable among the dealers, is going to try to mislead them. And, that's actually within the Zeitgeist Movement or Venus Project proposal, we suggest a huge stress on accurate education, but you can't even educate people about the dangers of these drugs if you're doing it in a way that ruins your own credibility. And, something like marijuana, for example, it's even when I was, somewhat on the anti-drug bandwagon, I still thought it was ridiculous that we were drinking alcohol and that was okay, but marijuana was not.
Well, I mean, you can make any argument you want, but at the end of the day, it's an herb. And
right.
That's why we have like the top oncologist from San Francisco General Hospital, Dr. Donald Abrams, hugely acclaimed professional man, basically saying that he believes that it should just be classified like saw palmetto or echinacea or something like that. It's an herb, really, and just because smoking it, which is really just one way of ingesting it, and it makes you high, that's not a reason for it to be illegal. There's probably a lot of things if you smoked it would probably make you feel crazy. It's funny that the black market, and we go into this a little bit in the movie, the black market is really what has perpetuated this, this whole industry of people trying to get high off THC and breeding marijuana that's high in THC when there's a lot of other aspects of the marijuana plant that have been forgotten because the only profit to be made is for the black market use. And so the only way to make or to grow profitable marijuana is marijuana that gets you super high. And so it's because of the black market and prohibition that has created all this, and along with the cartels and marijuana making up reportedly 70% of all the cartels' profit right now. And the people on that side of the fence say drug legalization or drug decriminalization is a defeatist attitude. That's what they'll say. It's a defeatist attitude. And at the same time, those same exact people will tell you that, well, but if we take marijuana away from the cartels, they'll just do something else. It's like, well, gee, that's a defeatist attitude. So you're saying we should let the cartels continue handling marijuana because if we take it away from them, they'll move to another industry. Okay, gee, that's not defeatist.
Well, right, and aside from the fact that it's defeatist as opposed to what, prohibition just doesn't work. It hasn't worked ever in history. And essentially it becomes very clear, particularly when you review things like Michael Rupert. Like my audience is very familiar with him, and the different things that he said about the CIA. And you guys go into a lot of stuff about the CIA, selling drugs or being involved with drug shipments and all that. It's pretty clear that people just don't want it to be legal because they're making too damn much money, from the prohibition.
Yeah, absolutely, and you don't really have to even believe in any kind of big conspiracy theory to get all this. If you just have the basic belief that people are greedy, then you get it. You got it. The drug war is a perfect scam because at the very root of the drug war is the concept that you can put a person in a cage because they're consuming something that doesn't profit you. That's like the fundamental aspect of the whole drug war. Now go out there and make $1 zillion. You know what I mean? And it's a perfect scam. It works great for anybody, including, people say, there's no proof that the CIA was selling cocaine. Well, but people in the CIA that were flying jets back and forth from places like Nicaragua, or people flying jets back and forth from places like Vietnam, or people flying jets back and forth from places like Afghanistan. If I could make $1 million in one day, would I do it? Maybe I would.
Right. That's, for sure, when you look at it that way, particularly in regards to the effectiveness of, prohibition and as opposed to education. That's why I was bringing up the PCP thing earlier. That's all the piece of education I ever needed. I will never touch that crap. At that point, no amount of just say no, and certainly no amount, it could be as legal as drinking water. I would never want that in my body.
And there's probably the funny part is that there's probably pharmaceuticals that'll make you just as crazy,
Oh yeah.
And PCP is kind of even, I guess, based on pharmaceutical, like horse tranquilizer or something. I don't know what it is, but you're exactly right. And back when I was younger, people used to talk about PCP like it would be cool. I didn't really know anybody that growing up in white suburbia, Texas, Houston, Texas, and then Austin. I didn't know any PCP users, but I think one time I had smoked a little bit of marijuana that had been spiked with a tiny bit of PCP, and it was a horrible experience of just feeling disconnected. But when you see someone just going crazy wild like they do, that are heavy PCP users, then, you are glad that there's a cop around. And, and then you just, gosh, I wish I could just feel like I could call the police without thinking they're going to come shoot my dog,
Right, for sure. And that's, and then I guess there were other things that are like that. Like, me being exposed to what crack addicts are like was more than enough for me to go, yeah, that stuff's the frickin' devil. Heroin, the same way. I'm not a religious person, but if you're going to do heroin, you might as well just inject Satan into your frickin' veins. If there were such a thing, that's what it's like. I mean, it's, I've met people who have come away from heroin many years later. They're clean, they're even health nuts. One girl in particular I know, she's a former heroin addict of the highest order, like, something straight out of Requiem for a Dream.
I just watched that the other night. That's funny you brought that up.
That movie will scare the hell out of you, too.
Yeah.
But it's just like something, that was her life. And she's, even now, years later, she's totally recovered. She's a health nut. She exercises constantly. She's very careful about her diet, doesn't go near anything resembling a drug. It's still there. Like, it is clear when you talk to her and spend time with her that something was destroyed by her time as a heroin addict that will never come back.
You mean like it's like the thought of it scares her, like she's afraid she could actually do it again? Or
no, there's just something about her. Like, I remember her before heroin, and I remember her after.
Right, okay, I get what you say. Like, it killed a part of her spirit or something.
Right, I mean, it's like some kind of brain damage left over or something, I don't know, but you can definitely tell. You can tell. You can also tell that she's clean now and that she's healthy. But like, there's also just different like rock stars and stuff you can see as they progress over years, the different effects that it has. And I guess that's what I'm saying to people is that because for the longest time, even among activists, people are like, why are you on this attitude about this? Are you just drinking the propaganda? I'm like, no, dude, I grew up next to it and I watched it.
Isn't that what's interesting though? Is that say a movie like Requiem for a Dream, in which they, are being honest about it, and some people might say, oh, it glorifies it, but I don't know how much you could say that when the kid's arm turns purple and they have to saw it off. But to me, a film like that does so much more to stop drug abuse than a Just Say No campaign or a DARE campaign, and it's because it's like being honest, and these. These government attempts, these so-called things about this is your brain on drugs or Just Say No or all these campaigns they've done, it's just shown time and time again that it just causes more kids to do drugs because it's putting it front and center. And also the government is telling kids that crystal meth and crack cocaine and marijuana are all equally as bad. And then kids smoke marijuana. They see that it's not bad, and then they go, well, if the government's lying to me about marijuana, they must be lying to me about crystal meth and crack cocaine. And so people tend to bleed it all together when marijuana never, ever should have been held in the same category as these powerful chemicals. It's an herb. And so them putting marijuana in the same category, it's just been a scam since day one. And really, if you took marijuana out of the whole drug war equation, out of being Schedule 1 equation, the whole drug war would crumble because there's just really not enough when it comes to just cocaine and heroin and crystal meth and all those things to support this whole giant prison complex.
Right. That's actually a very good point, and I think that they needed to continue to be illegal because it makes up so much of the drug war now. And the reason those other drugs are not as popular is because it becomes pretty freaking evident.
And they suck. Yeah, pot's great, and so they got to keep it illegal because everybody wants to do it. And the whole origin of the drug war started off as like, how can we put these Chinese people behind bars, or how can we screw over these Chinese? How can we screw over these Mexican people? How can we screw over these black people? Those are the very origins of the drug war, and so it just gives people the open invitation to basically take your stuff and get you caught up in the court system, take your money and just rob you. And basically, whether you're in a prison or not, the second you're in the system, you're basically the same as in prison, as when the government can just take all your money and take all your stuff.
Right, for sure. And that's, things like that, as we were saying, it becomes pretty damn evident that a drug is bad, when you see it. It's like, I have never witnessed, like, as in meth was not popular when I was living in the ghetto, so I didn't get to see it. But there's just enough information out there that's even put out by people who are pro anti-marijuana or pro, marijuana, legalization, who will tell you, yeah, meth frickin' ruins your life. Here. Yeah.
Isn't it weird? It's such a weird thing, and I think that deserves some study, and no one's done it yet. Is how meth has tend to be more of like the white rural drug, and crack has been more of like the black urban drug, and it's kind of it's an interesting thing. It's really interesting because even when you go into Skid Row, you see more of like the white people gravitating towards the crystal meth. So somebody should study that.
There's probably something to do with your life. I mean, I don't know. I guess I've heard, for example, that meth is kind of like a speed on steroids, so to speak, and maybe it has to do with like whatever it is that they're self-medicating for. If you're living the 9 to 5, it can be really draining. That's the only guess that comes to mind, is that maybe that's what gets them started, but you would think that's the other thing is that it's the kind of thing that it clearly does damage to you slowly over time. Like, when you see the pictures of people who have been on this stuff, it's not an instant thing that ruins your life. And you can tell it's like it's ruining their complexion, their face, their teeth, their hair, but it's over time, and it probably happens to them slow enough that they don't figure out that they're in danger until it's too late. And that's why they go for the drugs that kill you slower. I had heard that actually heroin was enjoying a new renaissance because the crack dealers were realizing that crack was killing their junkies too fast. But in any case, we're down to the last 9 minutes, and I want to be sure you get an opportunity. First of all, tell everybody where they can see your films.
Well, the film premiered on June 6th. We were in theaters in 20 cities. I won't list the cities, but from coast to coast, and including several cities in Michigan already. But right now, I would love it if everybody could watch it on iTunes, on Amazon. I'll name off the list real quick: Google Play, YouTube, Vudu, Viewster, Cinenow, AT&T Uverse, Charter, DirecTV, Dish Network, Medicom, Verizon Fios. So a lot of these video on demand things right now is basically where it's at. It's not on Netflix yet. It'll be coming on Netflix. But if you really want to help us out, go watch it on iTunes and write a little review and rate it, or give us a rating on IMDb or on Amazon. And definitely putting the word out there for anybody in the media or anybody who has a blog or anybody that writes for a magazine or a website that if you need to, we could even get you a free copy if you email me through AmericanDrugWar2.com. We can get you a free copy to watch through a Vimeo link if you want to write a review.
That's excellent. And, do some screenings. Now, you guys, do you still have some screenings happening?
Yes, I don't have them. Oh my God, those people doing them are going to murder me right now because I don't have them in front of me. But I know there's screenings. Actually, I know there's one coming up in Lansing, Michigan, and but you just go to AmericanDrugWar2.com and you can see the list of screenings at any given time. We're working through a company called Tug.com, incredibly cool new thing that's theaters on demand. And you can actually request a screening at your favorite theater in your neighborhood, no matter where you are. You go to Tug.com, click on American Drug War 2, and say, okay, and you give them your top 3 favorite theaters. They will actually negotiate the theater, you guys agree on the date that you're going to do the screening. You need to probably do it about a month out. And then you have to pre-sell enough tickets then to pay for the theater, which usually comes out to be around between 50 to 70 tickets. And then once you pay for the theater, then the rest becomes gravy on top of that. And so you can actually even make a few bucks from doing this, and it doesn't cost you a penny.
All right, well, that's awesome. I'll definitely recommend the iTunes thing. I've watched films there. And, to those of you out there who pirate things, I get that you want to do everything for free. But, in this instance in particular, when you're talking about a documentary filmmaker who's obviously going to probably have more products that you're going to want to see in the future, show your support. This guy is not some evil corporate monger that you're, flipping the middle finger up to by going and downloading his stuff on Pirate Bay.
Yeah. And the thing about iTunes is kind of tricky, because trust me, I'm not like a big iTunes guy, and now I've never in my whole life promoted iTunes, and I'm having to find myself promoting it all the time. But for some reason, like the whole industry now is using iTunes as kind of the barometer for how well a documentary is doing, and so iTunes has kind of become like the documentary charts, if you will. And so that's why, everybody's always saying, make sure you mention iTunes, make sure you mention iTunes. We're not really making that much money off it, believe me, but it's just helping to push it out there and get more distribution. And trust me, there will be plenty of free versions of this film to go around later, but we're trying to do, what we can to get it like distributed through as many channels as possible. And in order to do that, you've got to make sure that it's profitable for the people that are distributing it.
For sure. That's actually, I actually had a conversation with people about that recently, because Peter Joseph put his stuff up on Netflix and a couple of other places, and people were like, oh, he's in it for the money. I'm like, hey, geniuses, he still gives the damn thing away for free on YouTube and everywhere else. He's just trying to add to his distribution so that the information gets out to more people.
Yeah, exactly. And, and if you have a YouTube subscription, then you get it, you know what I mean? It's like, what difference does it make? Because if you subscribe to YouTube, then you can watch Zeitgeist or YouTube. If you don't, then don't. I mean, you can watch the entire American Drug War 1 right now is posted up by some person I don't even know up on YouTube right now. And you know what? I used to fight to take it down, and it's got like 500,000 hits on it. But it's like, you know what? Maybe that's 500,000 people that wouldn't have watched it unless it had been up on YouTube. So,
for sure.
It's like whatever. I figure let those people watch it, and maybe they'll tell a friend, and they'll tell a friend. It all works out in the end. I mean, at the end of the day, I want as many people to see the film as possible. But we spent 3 years and a lot of money on this thing, and it just came out. And so this is the deal. But once again, if you're sincere about wanting to write a review or just do anything to help promote the movie, I get a hold of me through AmericanDrugWar2.com. And I'll get you a free link.
All right, awesome. In fact, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that off the air after we're done. We're down to the last 4 minutes now. Is there anything else you'd like to plug? And also, I added a little bit more time just in case you wanted to talk about. Do you have any other projects? Do you have anything in mind after this?
One of the ideas for American Drug War 3 that's kicking around right now is a movie that's about the rise of mass shootings paralleled with the rise of antidepressants.
Oh, yeah.
Serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and just showing, basically the history of these mass shootings and how we didn't used to really have these, and how so many of these mass crazy shootings that are taking place are connected to medication. And it's so, maybe it would be a little bit along the lines of Bowling for Columbine, maybe like an updated version of Bowling for Columbine with the drug aspect thrown in there. So that would be kind of where I'm leaning towards American Drug War 3.
That's a really good idea, especially since a lot of people don't have the background to understand that, and I think that the way that you presented your information in the past combined with that would be great. You could even you could take a look at the psychotropic and active drugs that they're giving kids nowadays, although there are documentaries about that already, like The Medicated Child and stuff like that are all really good, but no, I would definitely support any efforts you do towards that, because I don't think a lot of people are thinking about it. But, once again, as I had told you off the air, because of where I work right now, they have Fox News up all the time, and you always have those drug commercials for the new drug. And holy crap, I mean, even in the commercials for these things, they're putting side effects might include death.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it, and anybody that's interested in hearing me talk a little bit about this, I just did an interview for wearechange.org. You can go there and watch a little 20-minute clip of me talking about all these things. But I think that if a side effect may cause suicide, to me that's the same exact thing as may cause you to start killing people. Because if I'm going to commit suicide, what's to say I'm not going to kill people? Same thing.
And what the hell are you giving a drug to somebody who's depressed?
I know, it's completely crazy, and I don't think they understand it. And I'm willing to put myself out there on the line and say that I've tried plenty of hallucinogenic drugs before, but the couple of times that I've taken antidepressants, I think it's way worse, way stranger, a lot stranger. And something where you feel like something evil is taking over your spirit, and compared to taking mushrooms or something where, okay, you are hallucinating, you are being, projected into another world, but there's something natural and okay about it where it's still your soul and you're still who you are. When my mom died, the doctor gave me Paxil, and it was a very bizarre, horrifying experience.
That's actually something interesting that I wanted to point out. I had an experience when I was younger, like before I was into activism, where this friend of mine's family, because I don't really have a lot of family, my friend's family found out that like I was just going to be sitting at home for Thanksgiving, and I still very much appreciate that they invited me over, but one of the things I noticed was that this was kind of a well-to-do family, and it's what I call the Prozac generation. And I don't even know that necessarily they were all on Prozac, but you're dealing with a bunch of people, adults, sitting around, and they're all just, it's so clear they're all on something. Like they all talk like, I call them like plastic people, like,
sound bites, like little sound bite people.
It's like, oh, how is Travis doing? Oh, he's fine. But Sarah got into a car accident. Oh my, is she okay?
The weather is so interesting. We talk about the weather for hours.
But they're sincere, and that's what's so scary. It's like you just get what I told Travis when we were going home. Ironically, because it was with my friend who invited me over. I was like, I just get the feeling that if I were to scream the word, just the F word really loud, in the room, that's what you want to do, just to see what all these people would do, because it literally is like they're living life as if their soundtrack of their life is elevator music.
Yeah.
And they've all got stuff that that they're being prescribed. I mean, everything is getting a label now for psychoactive drugs. Oh, you're sad because you have a divorce or you had somebody to die in your family. You don't need someone to talk to. You need this. Your child, like you talked about, that was when you brought up your the foster child. Oh well, so they had a temper tantrum. Well, they need this. It's like a drug for everything and everything with its drug. And the idea that some of these drugs get passed and like with the testing that's not necessarily all that fallible, it's basically it's kind of a nightmare. And I'm glad that I never got into it. They wanted me on Ritalin for my ADHD and short-term memory loss, and I had friends who were on it, and they came away from it like, well, yeah, I don't have any problem focusing anymore. Not that it matters because I'm a zombie, and that's. So, but basically, I want to thank you for being on tonight. And
sure. Thank you so much, Neil.
And when you start to work on this stuff, please don't hesitate to let me know what's going on, and so I can keep people informed. And if you have anything else that comes up that you want me to spread awareness of, or sometimes I also do these shows where I do kind of a panel of various people from around the world to talk about current events. If you're ever not busy, you can come on and talk about it.
Okay.
And that'll do it for that. I will talk to you a little bit more off the air. I'm going to tell everybody, thank you everybody for tuning in tonight. And if this is your first time checking out V-Radio, please check out my website, v-radio.org. There you can find archives of more shows like this one. And if you liked what you heard, consider a donation. It's basically just a tip at this point because I have a job now. So just a thank you for the people who, appreciate what I'm doing, because it does take a lot of time out of my life to get these shows together, and especially if I'm writing a blog. Sometimes I'll work as long as 8 to 12 hours on a blog that's going to be for a 1-hour radio show. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in, and I'll leave you guys with some words from Jacques Fresco and Roxanne Meadows.
This is Roxanne Meadows.
And this is Jacques Fresco.
And you're listening to V-Radio.